All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here for In the Soup. As you can see, one of our panelists, Heleen Debeuckelaere, isn't able to join us today because she's currently in quarantine, so I'm going to be a little bit a technical person and a hostess with the mostest, with also the back end. So please excuse me if I'm a little bit all over the place, but I'm going to try and center myself and be with you at this fine table with this fine, fine soup. So In the Soup is a new reflection format that we've created here at Wordt. It's a reflection format where we specifically want to go into conversation around the issues that are keeping us up at night, issues that are pertaining to this current moment that is quite spectacular for, I think, our lifetimes. And we want to get into the different levels of the discourses that are happening on a social level, on a political level, on a personal level, and see how we can react to them, respond to them, and also incorporate them into our working here at Wordt. My name is Kopano Tuyana Maruga. I am a performance artist, a writer, a cultural worker, currently working here at Wordt as a programmer and dramaturg. And tonight we have some fantastic panelists with us. We have Heleen Debeuckelaere, a historian, writer, and journalist, and the founding member of Mensen van België and Black Speaks Back, which is an organization in residence here at Wordt. And we have the luminous, the illustrious Philsan Osman, an African languages and cultures student at the University of Ghent. Originally from Somalia, she settled here as a teenager in the early 2010s, 2007. That's the one. And tonight we are going to be chatting about Black emergence and Black emergency. We're going to be looking at systems of emergence, how systems of emergence can come and exist under contexts of emergency. We're going to be looking at the context of Black Lives Matter in the Belgian context as well as the global context. And we're also going to be looking at what it means to emerge, to resist, to create art, to create life, to create opportunities for resistance, not just on a political level, but also on a personal level. So, In the Soup would not be In the Soup without the soup. So for the format of In the Soup, we have decided to collaborate with a collaborating food artist for every edition who cultivates a specially made soup with the content of that particular session in mind. And that food artist is Fiona Halinan. She is an Irish-born and Brussels-based doctoral student at Lucas School of Arts in Leuven. And usually how it would work is that Fiona would share with us the kind of methodology that she employed to create the soup. And we thought for this particular occasion, it would be most appropriate, since it's a conversation about Blackness and Black people and Black emergency and Black emergence, to centralize Black people in that conversation. So Fiona has given me the statement and the thinking that she has created around it, and I'm going to be reading that on her behalf. So, for the roast red pepper and tomato coconut soup. Preparing and serving food for In the Soup is in recent weeks. I have composed a series of short texts that connect the food served and the topic discussed at each event, and that reflect in different ways upon embodied knowledge and the necessity of care in social change. One of my aims in this may be simply put, integrating soup as a recipe and an offering at discursive events as a way to performatively underscore that what happens in the head cannot be easily separated from what happens in the belly and the body. Food writer and culinary anthropologist Verta May Smart-Grosvenor wrote about this better in her essay, The Kitchen Crisis 1, published in 1970. Food changes up into blood, blood into cells, cells into energy, energy changes up into forces which make up your lifestyle. So if one takes a creative, imaginative, loving, serious attitude toward life, everything one does will reflect one's attitude. Hence, when one cooks, this attitude will be served at the table and it will be good. In the context of the conversation about Black emergency, this connection between body and discourse comes into particularly urgent focus. This conversation, like other events in this series, aims to generate discourse that resonates in tangible ways in people's lives. Meanwhile, among the most flagrant and brutal impacts of the racist discourses and power structures that the long-standing background to this conversation are those which are forcefully visited upon Black bodies. Thinking of food as an example to characterize what I am doing in writing these texts as food writing is to evoke just one particular domain where Black voices, Black food history, and Black authorship are devastatingly underrepresented. Thinking about food, we have to think radically. chef, food writer, and activist Tunde Ware says in a Time magazine video on racial disparities in the food world and beyond. And food culture is only as dysfunctional or as functional as the wider culture that it exists in, Ware says. There are very little solutions to inequality in the food system that are going to work if they don't come from the voices of the folks who are critically thinking while on the margins. One might observe how discursive exclusion mirrors and relates to the racialized impact of food poverty in the West and food insecurity globally. Having in this series of events used food to frame, infiltrate, or inoculate the conversations that follow, it should be clear from the foregoing that my role in this particular conversation must primarily be to listen, learn from, and respond to participants whose lived experiences gives them a level of insight and ethical standing that I do not have in my position as a white person. My position within the conversation cannot, of course, be the end of the story. It gives me a particular responsibility to act outside of it. The simple recipe here for roasted red pepper, tomato, and coconut soup is one I make at home to soothe and energize. It'll be offered in real life at the live session in Wordt today, Thursday, July 30th. And the recipe is offered here for those who would like to make it at home for the online event, which was yesterday, Wednesday, July 29th. A vegan seasonal soup, and which will allow for adaptation. So thank you so much, Fiona, for preparing that for us. I'm going to take a bite of this because I'm super hungry because I went to the gym before this and I didn't actually eat anything after that, which is like not the thing to do when you exercise. So I'm just going to, and feel free to join me in that, to do the same, to take a little bite so that we can join each other in a little embodied ritual, join each other in the room. I'm trying to make it artistic, but I just want to eat, guys. I'm so sorry, Heleen, that you don't have the soup. I'm really, if I could, I would have made it, but that's how it be. I think, Heleen, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
All right, and we can hear, is that sound enough, or can it be a bit louder through the monitor? Heleen, can you say a few words for us?
Well, I would love to eat some of that soup, but I'm here in quarantine, so I'm just eating basic as bread with like cheese and stuff. So
keeping
boring
it real.
As fuck.
Keeping it real, keeping it nutritious. We love that for you.
That's very nutritious, honey. Yeah. I need to go to the shops, but yeah, I'm inside my house.
Yeah.
But last day of quarantine tomorrow. Freedom.
And your skin is looking fantastic in that sun.
Well, why, thank you. I'm not in the sun, actually. I'm in the shade, so...
Okay, so it just glows on its own. Fantastic. Heleen, I wanted to ask you if you could maybe do a bit more of an extended introduction of yourself as a practitioner, speaking to who you are, what it is that you do, where in the world you are right now, and how you're doing in relation to the current circumstances that you're under and that we're under as a society.
Well, in the world, I'm in Brussels right now. I'm in my garden because I was in contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19. So that is why I am quarantining. I have tested negative for those who are worried. But apparently you have to stay in quarantine 7 days after you tested. I don't know. It's complicated. I don't understand it either. A little bit more about myself. Yeah, I'm a journalist. I'm a writer. I started Black Speaks Back together with Emily Amponsa. We're doing also a video live today, but you can watch it later on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like and give a comment. These algorithms are not good for everyone who talks about race or racism. So if you want to support us, that's the best way to do it, actually. In my practice, I'm very dispersed, and this has been especially clear and hard the last couple of months, because I work as like a traditional journalist. I also work as a cultural worker. I also work as a writer, writing more long form And as an editor for this beautiful book that just came out, let me show it all to you. It's called Being Imposed Upon. If you can see it. I wasn't actually supposed to write for this book because, you know, I consider myself a Black woman, but I consider myself a mixed race woman. And I do feel like it's very important to make room for, because the narrative in Belgium has been dominated mostly for a long time by mixed race people. I think it is important to give space, but then somebody canceled, so I had to write a piece like in 2 days. So, you know, shit happens. But I was supposed to be only an editor actually in this book. And this book is kind of like a love letter, but also like a manual for Black women. So we created like, it's super small. So like if you see it next to my head, like this perfectly fits inside every, well, except those like mini purses that are really cool now, but in every purse, in every backpack. And it's supposed to be like something you can hold on to closely to your heart. And it is written by Belgian as in a broad, like nationality as in a broad construct, women living in Belgium, from both the Francophone and the Flemish side. So it is one of the first bilingual books, I think, that has been written, and especially one of the first books written by Black women from Belgium. And yeah, I'm really proud of it. So really go out and buy it. I mean, you can only buy it at Pipi Blues in Brussels or buy it online. But yeah, definitely support this book. And yeah, how I'm doing in general, I guess, you know, like things have been hard. Like I feel like we're all struggling. But I think we're gonna go more deeply into that later, probably. So for those that don't know, I can only see Copano's face. I cannot see any of you because, you know, they just want to keep me to themselves. I don't know what's going on.
I mean, can you blame us?
But yeah, I wish I was there. I wish I could participate like physically, but you know, this is how we do things these days.
Yeah, and we're so thankful that you're with us, and so thankful as well for the nuance in your positionality and the way that you position yourself as a creator, as a Black woman of a very particular intersection. I think that's really important in the conversations that we have in relationship building, and it really reflects in your practice and what it is that you bring as a creative, as a writer, as a historian. So really, really thank you for that. And thank you also for taking care of yourself, and by virtue of taking care of yourself, taking care of others on the level of COVID by remaining in quarantine. I really appreciate you as a person, holistically.
Don't make me cry yet. It's too soon, honey.
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Get your tissues ready. So now I'd love to move along to our luminous Philsan. Can you illuminate us with who it is that you are, what it is that you do, where it is that you're coming from, and how it is that you're doing today?
Well, I will do my best. First, I'd like to say hi to everybody I know who actually came up and showed up. Pull up, pull up. Thank you. My name is Philsan Osman. I am many things to many people, but most importantly, I'm a product of a lot of love and kindness and strength of the women in my family, women whom I see as teachers, and women who've created communities that sustain me. So, and my practice in this context, I am a student. I am a student of African languages and cultures in the University of Ghent, right down the road. And I try very, very hard in that context to voice the daily struggles and the mundanity of being Black in Belgium and female, or female presenting in this country, and I do my best in this venture or venue, and well, I haven't written any books like the wonderful Heleen has done. But I'm still very much living and learning and teaching from my own experience, because our lived experiences are very much as important as what you would find told to you in a textbook about who and what it means to be Black, to be feminine, to be how you say to be embodied in what it is to be all those identities in this time, in this context, and in this place. For now, how I'm feeling, well, I'm good. Alhamdulillah, we thank God. I'm good. I'm good because I'm fed. I'm good because I'm loved, and I'm good because I'm held by the people who love me the most. And that's where I gain my strength. That's where I draw my power, and I'm very thankful for that. And I hope that my presence is the same for others as well. There you go.
We're so thankful for you. We're so thankful that you're here with us. And we're so thankful for what you offer, not only to those that are very close to you, but the ripple effects of that. Because as we all know, all the textbooks that are written about intersectionality, about Blackness, about Afro-pessimism, come from Black life. So the work that you do, just by living, just by breathing, just by moving through the world, is immensely valuable. And I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you too.
Should have done this in the beginning, but a little bit of housekeeping. So I'm going to try and allot some time at the end, about 15 minutes, 20 minutes for Q&A. So if, as we're talking, there are things that you think that you'd like to ask in that session, please just indicate with your hand and I'll acknowledge you. And we won't take the question then, but we'll save it for the end. But just so that I know if it's necessary to allot that kind of time, if we can just kind of keep the conversation going, or if it's preferred to kind of like just keep a little bit of time at the end, and we'll see if anything comes up. So if things do come up, just put your hand up, I'll acknowledge you, and then we take them at the end. I think everyone knows what the bathrooms are. There was one more thing that I wanted to say in the terms of housekeeping, but clearly it's not particularly important. So I'm actually just gonna go to what I wanted to say was to give a bit more framework around emergence, the idea of emergence in relation to emergency. So I'm thinking about emergence, or I'm taking inspiration from the text of Adrienne Marie Brown, who's a Black American author, women's rights activist, a doula, and organizer. And she writes a text called Emergent Strategy, where she takes inspiration from the natural world, she takes inspiration from plants. And so what emergent strategy is understood to be, it's kind of the opposite of a planned strategy. So it's about how in the plant world, plants respond to their environment. And as we see in kind of urban environments, the way that flowers will find a way to grow in between cracks on the sides of walls in any kind of position possible, that's the kind of theorization that is that emergent strategy and this idea of emergence is based on. So how in this kind of like metaphor of white supremacy as this concrete that creates a kind of oppression or a kind of pressure on Black life, how even in that context, Blackness and Black resistance, Black art, Black people, Black love, Black family emerges from that context. So this is kind of the parallels that I'm trying to work through, this idea of emergence in the context of emergency. And on that point, I want to direct my first question to Heleen. And speak a little bit about your practice with Black Speaks Back, the platform that you've created, and how Black Speaks Back has been in this particular moment trying to create a platform to give many voices to the people that are involved in the Belgian uprising, this resistance movement that is growing in Belgium of Black people and people who are resisting the police, resisting systems of oppression for Black people living here. So I was wondering if you could speak to what Black Speaks Back is and how it kind of came about and how it's operating today, and how Black Speaks Back has created that platform for the Belgian uprising.
Okay, so Very easy questions. I think Black Speaks Back, well, it started out of a reactionary kind of thing. I don't know if anyone remembers this movie Black coming out. It was a very problematic depiction of people of sub-Saharan African descent. And Emma Lee Amponsa, my co-creator, really wanted to do something about that. But like at the same time, we were like, you know, there's already all these debates and all that stuff happening in Brussels. Are we really adding to the conversation? So the idea started like, okay, we're not like tech savvy enough to start a podcast, but we can do videos, right? Like that's super easy. Okay, it turned out not to be the case. Like it's so hard. And we have an incredible collaborator who does like all of that work for us and helps us really like to create. And so that's how Black Speaks Back became a media platform a video platform on social media. And that was where it was supposed to be. Like that was the only thing that it was supposed to be. It was never about centering me or Emma as like personalities. It was about giving a platform to people to discuss issues, to become an archive of changing tides and changing emotions within the Afro diaspora. But because we were one of the new, I guess, maybe upcoming and very few at that time, which has changed dramatically, which is a very good thing, Afro diasporic organizations that were Flemish. We got a lot of attention. Some of it good, some of it not so good. And there were a lot of like questions being posed to the organization, like, can you do a workshop? Can you give interviews? Can you do this? Can you do that? And that was really difficult to manage because we never really wanted to center ourselves. Like we both have our own individual practices. And it was never about like giving more, what do you say, air to the personality cultus, like one person representing all of Blackness. No, it was supposed to be giving air to a multitude of perspectives. Some of them we don't agree with, some of them we do agree with, but it's never about our opinion. It's about creating discourse. And that's why we've always been like teetering on the edge between the cultural world and the media world, but we've kind of decided we're gonna leave all that behind and just create our content, and that's what we do. So if you want to see more, you can just check out our platform. But then what happened after the killing of George Floyd was that I don't know why. I don't know why this happened now. And I guess like there will be studies about this and many people have opinions about it, but I haven't figured it out yet. But when George Floyd died, suddenly a lot of white people were feeling like really guilty or something, whilst we Black people already knew what was going on and have been discussing it. Black people, not only Black people, but also people of color in Belgium, have been discussing police violence more broadly. But I guess like something hit some kind of fire, and probably was the Rona like doing overtime. And so there was this protest that was organized that was just happening on social media. There was a lot of like worries about it, like what's it about, who's behind it, a lot of concerns like, is it right-wing propaganda, etc. So because of what we do, we have a very large network, and we started bringing people together to organize not an officially sanctioned protest, because there wasn't an officially sanctioned protest, but at least something that was created in discussion with activist organizations throughout Belgium, across language borders. And from that grew the Belgian Network for Black Lives, which I'm personally not a part of. As a journalist, I cannot be part of that organization. But, and they really worked a lot with like the official organizations from the protests, which were change.org, but that's their website, Change ASBL, the VZW Change, to try and make the protests more inclusive, more intersectional, representing more perspectives, including the families of the victims, including all families of all the victims, and especially like families like with the case of Adil and Mehdi, people who've recently died in Belgium, making this really like a Pan-African effort. And that wasn't. I mean, I was looking from the sidelines because I really couldn't be that involved. But it wasn't an easy process. The people that did it, like, kudos to them. They really deserve a lot of respect. Shout out to Bamko, shout out especially to Café Congo and Gia Brassard for doing a lot of work, Eric, etc. Like a lot of people, Olave, like staying up late, making all the notes, etc. Yeah, so for me, this experience was, how to put this politely, it was it was a very interesting rediscovering racism episode times a gazillion in Belgium to me. Again, we saw the same pieces. Oh, things are happening in the States. Again, we saw the same piece. Oh, things maybe are happening here too. Again, we saw the same pieces. Oh, look at all these Afro-descendants talking about how racism affects them on a daily basis. As a journalist, I've seen these pieces a million times. Like, we do the same repetition, but it was more intense. And that's why I think like this idea of Black emergence, Black emergency was very interesting, because for me, what I try to do with my work, Black Speaks Back, but also through the book, also in my journalism, although I have to work through media, like mainstream media, because I have to also pay my bills. I always try to center the people that I think we should speak to, which are, for me personally, Black, mixed race, people of color, of all genders. And what I really felt in this period was this whole rediscovering of racism, was that it was like almost a white supremacist agenda. Like, you have to be here right now to talk to me. Like, my phone was ringing all day, every day, with journalists looking for people to talk to, with all types of media, with organizations wanting to do something. We all want to do something. And it's like, we've been screaming this from the top of our lungs for such a long time. Nothing happened. And it was really disheartening to see like this extreme attention that you knew was not going to last longer than a month. And look at where we are now, like we're 2 months later, maybe. I don't know exactly. And that attention has almost all but died down. None of the political promises that were made in all the after hours TV shows were brought into fruition. We still don't have an anti-racism plan. We still don't have changes in the curricula. We still don't have any real decisions. Now we have this commission that is going to happen. Like, it will be very interesting to see what's going to happen with that. But I'm critical. I'm looking at it from not a cynic perspective, but like from a critical perspective, knowing that like people from diasporic organizations are not included in the commission as of now, as of today. And I guess that's what my whole fatigue is these days, is that I don't know I'm not sure who we're talking to these days. I don't know at what pace we're talking to people, what about, and who is setting the agenda. Are we really setting the agenda, or is it like still kind of a majority agenda that is trying to keep the status quo as it is today? And that's what it feels like to me. So yeah, that's kind of how I've been feeling lately, and that's also what I'm seeing around me personally. Like we were all investing a lot of time, a lot of energy. We all had to be relevant. We all had to be on the ball. We all had to like speak up right now. And I'm just saying that I'm kind of done doing that. Like I will speak up when I have an informed opinion.
Yeah, I completely hear that and feel that and appreciate in the first place, the vulnerability to admit what is often not a popular thing to admit, that this struggle is tiring, that this struggle is inconclusive, the struggle is confusing, and this struggle is doesn't have a single answer or doesn't have a single trajectory, especially in a context like Belgium where the diaspora are coming from so many different realities and there's so many different levels of privilege and disprivilege and so many different intersections. And I really appreciate how you highlight how in this moment, what seemed to make this an emergency was the attention of whiteness on this moment, as opposed to the reality of Black violence and the reality of Black death, which is ubiquitous. This is an experience that we, as Black people, are very familiar with. And I think if white people are honest, are very also themselves very familiar with. So there is a lot of skepticism in why this moment and why this kind of attention and why so many promises that continue to not get fulfilled and why continue to expect a certain level of labor to be extracted from Black bodies and Black people so that white people can perform a certain level of acknowledgement or a certain level of political awareness that has no tangible or very few tangible realities for a myriad of Black people. So I appreciate that cynicism, I appreciate that vulnerability, and I appreciate your exhaustion. I think those are all valid things, and they are all important things to be able to witness each other in, and to not only valorize the supposed strength and the stereotypical figure of the strong Black person or the strong Black woman, and how problematic that image can be, and how detrimental to our collective health. I really thank you for that, and I honor that.
It's my pleasure, and I just want to quickly say, like, let's not forget that this weekend we had a very public and very mean discourse about Sabrine Ingabire, a close friend of mine, who was who's getting death threats every day. So, like, to the point where she like really has to be careful and take care of herself. And this is happening 2 months after everyone was posting Black squares on their on their Instagram. So yeah, I have questions, and I kind of don't have the energy to ask them.
Completely understandable, and thank you for raising that very contemporary point about what is happening to Sabrine at the moment at the hands of the poor journalistic decisions of the More. I really appreciate you highlighting that. I want to swivel over to Philsan to talk a little bit about your practice and to talk a little bit about your perspective in relation to Black emergence and Black emergency. And I kind of want to frame it with this, because we were talking about the private domain and the domestic domain as a site of resistance, as a site of protest, and how the very act of existing as a Black person can constitute a certain level of resistance. And I was reading the essay of Bell Hooks, who is a Black American theorist and organizer and activist. And she has this beautiful, beautiful essay called Home Place, A Site of Resistance. And in the introduction, it's written, much of women's writing has been viewed as domestic, concerned with matters of home and hearth, organized into narratives of family life and relationships. In fact, for much of the history of women's writing, such domestic narratives and advice constituted the only acceptable form of public discourse allowed to women. In this essay, Bell Hooks takes the concept of private domesticity and rereads it as a theoretical stance and as a public act of resistance. And I wanted to hear from you as someone who is coming from a very different part of the world and had to remake the idea of home in what could be considered the jaws of white supremacy and the birthplace of colonialism, of slavery, of so many institutions of oppression for Black people, but also for the beyond Black people in terms of capitalist structures for the entire world. And yet you came here and you were able to make home, and you were able to make family, you were able to make friends, you were able to make a space for yourself. And I wondered if you could speak to that process for yourself and how you think those things might relate.
Yeah, sure. For us, familiarly, the home is very much a sacred space. It's a space where not only do we not only come together, but that's where we also develop ideas and talk through theories and learn about one another, and then through one another the rest, the context in which we live in. And we have managed to make that not only a safe space for ourselves, but a safe space for our community as well. Our house is a revolving door of people who want to come and just find a space where they can be themselves and where they can have conversations with themselves without having to perform the idea of being okay. You know, because we're always expected as a certain people to be fine, strong. There are certain stereotypes that are involved with being a person of color, and especially a Black woman inhabiting these spaces, that does not allow us any kind of vulnerability, and which our vulnerability is seen as a weakness and then used against us, which is another form of violence. So in these safe spaces we create, like the ones that we have created in our home, and the ones other Black people and queer Black people and people of different oppressed identities, is we are reclaiming that space, the space of the home. And especially for Black people, that's not something that has always been the idea of home is not something that has always been intangible. For white people, it has. For us, it's not. It's always a place where it's still a place where state-sanctioned violence can find us. In where I'm from, that is in the form of war. Where in America, that is the form of police brutality. Here, that is the form of all kinds of other kinds of violence, including police brutality. And so those spaces are not exactly, it's not, there isn't an idea that those spaces are untouchable. They're very much places where the state-sanctioned violence can still find us. And that's how Breonna Taylor could have been shot in her house and nothing come of it. So the reclaiming of that area, of that space, and making it a safe space not only for ourselves but our community is a form of emergence. It's a form of letting each other know that the outside world might not be safe, but they are safe places you can come and be yourself and rejuvenate so that you can go back outside and you can continue the very tedious work of anti-racism and in the hopes that you can build a world where you having to do that work is no longer necessary. So that is very, very important that we understand that and that we respect those spaces, because many times black safe spaces are antagonized, and you always have this question for, but why do you need the safe space, or why can't we be a part of it, or why can't we, intrude, invade, or again be an occupying force in some way, and then you have no energy to explain that because you needed the safe space in the first place so that you could rejuvenate. So you're sitting there and you're like, please leave me alone. I beg, like, go away. Go away. And so these are definitely places that we have reclaimed for ourselves as Black people and as Black women. The revolution does happen outside, but it is radicalized, it is formed, it is fed on the kitchen tables of our homes. It is where they become what we see in the streets. And it is those people that we have also very much forgotten, because those people tend to be female presenting people, and therefore how they embody revolution is not seen as anything that is valid, because it's not the way the how you would see it being done or how you would expect it to be done. So that is very important to understand. And coming back to what Heleen had said in the end about what was all of this for at the end of the day, we do a lot of work, a lot of emotional labor, a lot of labor for our communities to keep them whole, so that we could survive in a context that is very much trying to snuff us out. But in many ways, that work and that labor is used against us. Because we keep our communities alive, then the state can use that as a way to legitimize this nationalistic agenda, and to say, to then weaponize it against other brown and Black peoples in the rest of the world. But we cannot stop the work we do because it's necessary. It's very necessary work, and it's very noble work. So I think there is a conversation that we must have with one another in the ways in which that we want to then continue to do that work outside of the white gaze, in a way that is not only that helps our community survive but thrive. And where we can build these safe spaces with the idea that they're not permanent safe spaces, but just a place where these ideas that we have can become radicalized and immobilized to create this world that even we cannot imagine right now, because what white supremacy does is kill the imagination. It kills the idea of fantasy and how far we can take what we want and what is capable, what we can actually do. Because you're then inundated with the practicality of life. But what does that do? That doesn't help you understand how, in God's name, you're going to dismantle this mechanism. The mechanism being the colonialist project, the imperialist project, the white supremacist structures that have literally and are part of literally every single structure on the planet today. There is nowhere Black people can go and be safe. We can't go back to Africa and be safe. We can't be safe here. We can't be safe anywhere on the planet. I'm sure if we went to the moon, they will find us. There is no place where we can be safe. So our revolution has been one that has been ongoing. Just because it ebbs and flows does not mean it stopped. It started in 1619, and in 2020 it's very, very real. It's still very, very ongoing, because we have not reached a point. We are still in 2020 explaining and telling people to understand and conceptualize our humanity. That is an unacceptable state of being. And so what we have to do now as communities, I feel, because I was also thinking about this whole time this whole thing was going on, because, you know, in our spaces, we have these conversations. We have them all the time. And so to have them all the time, and then have them in social media, and then have them on the news, and then have them outside, and have every single white person, you know, knock your door and, you know, invade your space in the way for, are you okay? What can I do? It is well-meaning, but it's also not what we're talking about here, you know? And so there was this idea for, collectively, we were just tired. You know, just everybody I talked to was like, I'm truly done. Let's talk about something else, you know? And so when we talk about how, in which ways that we can protect these spaces, we also have to start building, the community building has to happen in such a way that we pass the phases, you know? Right now, we are always stuck in a phase, and I think that's why it never materializes. What we want never materializes, because what white supremacy structures do is take revolution and any ideals or objectives about revolution, strip them down of their original context, and then monetize them or commodify them in a way that makes it part of the structures that already exist, and therefore they lose their meaning. So when we are talking about these structures and these modems and mechanisms of understanding, we must also understand and theorize in a way that our practices remain in a way in those safe spaces, but also not in those safe spaces. You understand? So that because of the way these structures are and how violent they are towards us, we have a tendency of then like moving according to what the structures want. And that is, of course, the first phase. Okay, the first phase is that you have to then recognize that there's a problem. And then the second phase is then that you start recommending to people how many books they have to read in order to, you know. And then we never get past that. So the point, the idea behind this community building, and I think what the emergence theory is that we want to create communities where we pass those phases, and not only don't we pass those phases, but then where we then push them out. So it's a kind of working from inward, from the inside to push them out. And I think that the home becomes then a central, integral part of revolution. And what happens in there becomes a central, integral part of revolution. To Helene's point at the end there, where she was like, she was really, really tired and she doesn't know who this is for anymore. That happened to all of us. We didn't know who this is for anymore, because everything we do in this context is reactionary. So we react to what is being done to us. And so in many ways that is still centering whiteness, it's still centering white structures, it's still centering the white pathology. And so we don't get anywhere. We get tired, and then we're like, okay, 2 months, from 2 months, we're just going to start again. 2 months later, we're going to start again from the same point. So there's this idea that we then have to just turn away, literally just turn away, and be very much busy with one another. You know, this idea of the communities we create for one another, and for the betterment of each other, without any way, shape or form addressing or even looking at what white people may want, think, feel, because that time is over. There is no space for it anymore.
Yeah. And I really love how you talk about the need for a kind of interiority, like going inside, like literally into the home, into the body, which is the only home that we have.
Yeah.
I think that's such a... it makes me think of what quite a few theorists talk about. Gloria Anzaldúa in Frontera, Borderlands, Angela Davis. they say in similar kind of language, in order to create the world that we want to see, we first have to be able to see it. We first have to be able to imagine it. And your amazing point of the putting people in situations of trauma and traumatic context, raising the kind of adrenal functions of the body, disallows the ability of imagination, because all you think about is survival.
Survival, exactly.
Right. When you think about what is supposedly possible, and what is possible is what is set up for you by the institution, by the system. And what Heleen was talking about was so on point, in the sense that what is kind of put before Black people in this context here in Western Europe is that, okay, in order for us to move forward, you need to pave a way that can be translatable and understandable and palatable to white people, and get white buy-in.
Exactly.
As if Black life requires white people to want it to exist.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of like this misconception of what this idea of freedom might mean or might look like, and that it is supposedly contingent on getting that permission from some kind of an establishment that you can now be free.
Exactly.
And if we live in context and if we understand that capitalism, racism, sexism are built on these structures of disallowing a certain kind of person or a certain kind of community to move, to emerge, expecting those same people to be like, and here we give you permission to do that very thing, would be the abolishment of themselves. So all of us across our kind of different intersections are trying to find these ways of, instead of being responsive, how can we be responsible? How can we be able to respond? And a big part of that, I think, is this idea that you talk about the interior and how I love what you say about turning away.
Yeah.
And that it's so difficult, because we have these trauma responses. When we see violence, there's an instinct that is so ingrained into us. And this idea of like, what would happen if you feel that instinct, if you make space for it and decide to turn away?
Turn away.
And yeah, I'm just going to hold on to that. Thank you.
More to the point is that this idea that the ontological reference has been taken away from Black people, and therefore what is who and what we are has been imposed upon us by whiteness. So whiteness is defined by what Blackness is, and everything that is Black is therefore not good, because everything that is white is the opposite of what it is to be Black. And so in order for us to just break that binary, this idea of existing because we have been defined by whiteness, is to just turn away and look within to ourselves and within ourselves and into our own cultural practices, our familiar kinship, all the things that was taken from us, and try and rebuild it from the histories and what we have left and what white supremacy has not yet killed. And also leave some space for new things to come from that. A new way, a new mode of thinking, a new mode of existing in this body and occupying this space in this time.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. Heleen, I want to bring you back into the conversation, back into the room with us. Because a lot of what we're speaking about, you actually speak about in your essay, in being imposed upon. In the essay, We Do Not Make Free People. And you talk about this idea of what I think is so integral, this idea of failure, and how putting yourself in a position to allow for failure creates possibilities that maybe you weren't aware of before. And it really makes me think of how Philsan, you made an excellent point that in certain instances, because of the way that certain systems work and the way that they present themselves as the only viable option, so let's say whiteness, capitalism, whatever it may be, we as people that are responding against those systems often take on the modes of those systems or the ways of working of those systems because, like you say, there's no space to imagine something else. And so a lot of the time in our movement work or in the work that we've seen, there's a certain kind of clarity and there's a hypothesis and then there's a conclusion and there's clarity in the argument. And we're often asked in very derailing ways like, okay, if this is not the world that you want, if you don't want a world with police, what does the world without police look like? As if those contexts don't exist in different parts of the world. If you look at a micro level, if you look at a white suburb, for example, where the police do not necessarily move in the same way that they move in a black neighborhood, you see what it can look like for a society to be without the police, and you see how that frees up resources on a financial level to go to different places. So I wanted to hear from you in your experience with this idea of failing, with this idea of incongruity, with this idea of not having the answers and being okay with not having the answers? How does that interweave into your practice, and how do you think that that actually materializes and becomes something practical?
I mean, it's not supposed to be practical, right? Like, that's the essence of the thing, is that every time we have these episodes, we have voices coming and saying, we will make racism palatable to you, and we will make racism understandable to you, the white audience. Or, and I'm using the word white here in a liberal sense. I don't particularly mean skin color. And it is very painful to see how we go through these cycles of trying to reinvent the same answers over and over again. Like, I remember when I started like my journey as a writer and as maybe like a thinker on this subject, I was like cocky as fuck. Like, I thought I had all these answers. I was like, I have it all figured out. And the older I get, the more I realize like people have been doing this for a very long time. People have been trying all the different types of ways of communicating why you should care about Black bodies. And I don't know if we really got anywhere. Like, I know this sounds super pessimistic, and I don't want to make the audience feel sad or anything, but this is how I'm feeling today. So I'm going to be like real upfront about it. And this is how I've been feeling for a long time now. Like, I remember when I listened to this podcast, The Daily, it's by the New York Times, and it was when John Lewis died. And they were talking about his legacy as a civil rights activist, and him doing the whole nonviolent approach, and him, and then other people like Sophie Carmichael doing the more, let's rise up, more in your face approach. Although no, both of them are in your face, but they were renouncing nonviolence at least. And I remember seeing this viral video. I don't know if any one of you saw it. It was a video of this older man and a younger guy arguing during a Black Lives Matter protest. Like, one of them really wanted to like tear shit down, and the other one was like, no, we have to do it this way. And I was like so disheartened by that, because you see them arguing and you see them like trying to find a solution, and like Black people have tried everything. I feel like we've tried everything. I mean, even looking inward, like Pan-African conferences and etc. and so forth. Like, we've been trying for a long time, and it's really hard because it feels like the liberations of a lot of minorities are dependent on the liberation of Black people, and whether they be Latinx or of the Sahel or wherever they be from, like. There's this thing where people say from Africa, like once Congo is free, the rest of Africa will be free. I feel like this also counts for Black people in general in the world. And that's what the whole essay is about, is I only have questions. That's what I was saying before. Like, I only know that we're not creating freedom. Like, the way we're talking to each other, the way we're expecting ourselves to be the best, and burning ourselves out every generation after another. The way we are hurting each other, hurting ourselves, I'm concerned, and I don't know what to do anymore. And this is why with Black Speaks Back, for example, with this book, I want to write only. I mean, everyone can read it, of course, but my audience are people like me, because that's all I have energy for, and that's all I have time for. And I mean, like, I'm almost getting emotional talking about this, but I had a lot of theories and I had a lot of, like, very nice phrases and stuff like that. But the longer I'm in this thing, the less I know about this thing. And I think that's a normal evolution. And so, yeah, when I say we don't make free people, I want us to ask ourselves, how can we let each other and ourselves fail? How can that be a strategy of survival? Because that's what white people do all the time. Like, they be failing at a lot of things. And everyone is like, duh, I was raised by a white man, So I was raised with the cockiness of, you can fail at shit and it'll be fine. And then I figured out life is not like that for a woman of color in Belgium. So then I was really pissed off at him. Like, you gave me all this cockiness and all this, like, idea of mediocrity that I could, just be whatever and it'll be fine. But now I'm like, maybe he wasn't wrong. Like, and I know that's not a real strategy for survival. I know that's not a real, when it comes down to, like, doing your job and getting paid, that's not how that works, because that's not what we're dealing with. But at least when it comes to each other and how we're structuring these movements, that's something we can do for each other as a means for survival. Is we don't have to put the agendas that white supremacists put on us. We can be kinder, and we can be softer, and we can let each other breathe a little bit more. And I guess, yeah, that's kind of, the essay is really short. Like, it's the shortest essay in the book. It's like 2.5 pages, which was probably nice for you, Copano, when you had to read it for this preparation. But it's also because I'm really reflecting more about like putting, as a writer at least, like, what am I putting on the paper, and what is it doing for people? So that's also why I'm trying to, I guess, not use so many words anymore. So yeah, so my explanation is also short, I guess. I don't know if you have, like, any more questions about the essay.
No, I think that the essay speaks for itself in the first part, and your statement on the essay also speaks quite strongly. This idea of putting yourself in a position to be able to question, and I think that there's something quite in the context that we're in, quite radical of that, where so many answers are expected of us, to actually put ourselves in a position where, like, yes, there are many toolkits that have been made available, whether it be Angela Davis, whether it be Gloria Anzaldúa, whether it be from the examples of Patrice Lumumba,
let's
of
talk about
Thomas
the fucking book
Sankara.
lists we all get pounded by, like, these days, the anti-racist book list.
Right, like, and this is the problem, and I think this is what's so important about this dubiousness that you have, is that we understand simply by the fact that everyone on this planet lives so differently, there cannot be one answer to racism because its manifestations are so multiple. And it has so much to do with relationships between people that are so individual and that are so specific, and then create very individual contexts of societies. So I really appreciate that you're making a practice of getting into a habit of failing and getting into a habit of questioning whether your assumptions are founded or not, and whether that matters, and having that question in your mind of actually, do I need to be speaking to everyone all the time? I think that's really, really powerful. I do want to bring our attention to the fact that we are coming to the end of our time. So if there are questions that are coming up for people, don't be shy to put up your hand. And we have a question over there. Yeah? Do you wanna offer your question? I don't know if there's a floating mic. Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, I can repeat your question just in case.
I don't know if it's a question or a statement or both, but I'll just talk and then hopefully we'll come to something.
Crystal.
I like that idea of failing that Heleen was talking about and being kind to each other and giving each other space, because I feel like the world that we live in today has created such a cancel culture that the moment that you do something wrong, be it in your immediate environment or on a world scale, you do not get the chance to even talk about it and grow from it and move on from it and transcend from it. And so bringing that idea back to the forefront is something that I find very interesting and be a takeaway. We talk about it all the time, I think, again, on the kitchen table at home, where Philsan says that revolution starts. We were talking about Beyonce. Everybody who knows me knows I'm a huge fan. But during this COVID crisis and having time to think, I reached the point of actually killing my idols, you know? And I don't know why I'm getting emotional. I'm also getting my period, so bear with me. I'm just saying, pretty out there. And she brought this new project with Disney Plus called Black is King or King is Black or something of that nature. And the way Africa, the whole continent, was presented was in such a how white people would conceptualize Africa is how she actually conceptualized it. On the one hand, it's not her fault because her own culture got stripped from her, and on the other hand, you wish she knew better, but then you're giving her the space to fail and explore her blackness and understand that blackness and move from it and transcend her further from the mistake that, if you'd like to see it as such. So I found that very interesting, and the operationalization of that idea would be, for example, what she did, right? Next to that, I would also like to talk about that idea of us or everybody understanding that there's a problem, and everybody knowing that there's a solution to that problem, that there are books out there, lists, podcasts, radio shows, everything is literally Google, right? The solutions are there, the problem is apparent, but there's a lack of willingness from structure to move, and that is what we need to talk about. It's not on an individual level, it's the idea of structures that need to be questioned, right? We're talking about universities where we learn stuff, we're talking about cultural institutions where we go to, we're talking about restaurants and cafes that we go to, literally structures that exist that are not listening to the voices of the streets, because they're loud enough, they've been loud for the last few months. And lastly, that I would advise everybody, black, white, and everything in between, to read Fanon's Black Skin, White Faces, to really break free from binaries, right? Because he is only, for me personally, he's one of the few authors that enters the psyche of a black person and tries to understand the context in which a black person is put outside of the continent, and puts it down on paper so well that by the end of the book, you literally break free from binaries. And when you break free from binaries mentally, you literally, nothing can stop you. You white supremacist structures tell us to look at things from such a binary point of view that everything that we produce is within that binary. Our language is within that binary, right? And so breaking free from it, you look at things from a whole different perspective. It's only when you're free in your mind that you can detach yourself sometimes from the pain of violence, be it structural or actually physical and touching, you know. So my question, which had a long-winded introduction, is: has anybody on this table, might be a stupid question, but I've been told stupid questions don't exist, so I'm just gonna throw it out there. This idea of the creation of a new world beyond this struggle, because at the end of the day, we want to create a world that we cannot imagine, and due to the structures, there's a crisis of imagination. And so this new world that we want to create, are we really thinking about it every time we go on the streets? Or is it always just to be in this state of fighting and not knowing the light at the end of the tunnel? Like, are we aware of where it is that we're actually going when we go on the streets? Or is everything happening on a micro level? Are we looking at things from a micro level? And by that I mean, one branch could be police brutality, the other branch could be structural violence, the other branch could be part of police brutality, and the other one could be sexism, and so on and so forth, right? What is the light at the end of the tunnel? How does it look for you? Do you make, in Dutch, I've never thought I'd go from English to Dutch, but I'm doing it today. We say this denkoefening. Are you making that mental exercise of actually thinking of that creation of that new world? Do not let these structures kill your imagination. Do not allow them to take that away from you. It's all you have, you know? And so, how does that look? Do you think about it? Does that give you energy? Does that give you positivity? Does that give you space? Does that give you the freedom to break free and just be like, this is all going on, but I'm detaching myself from it, and this is the world that I've created and prefigurated in my head, and this is how I want it to look like. How does that look like? So in times of hurt and exhaustion, it could be, you could go back to that and hold on to that, maybe, you know what I mean? And so how does that world look like beyond this struggle, beyond this violence, for you?
I'd like to take that question and actually direct it to Philsan.
I knew this was coming.
Since you are the world builder, the homemaker, please break bread for us.
But I think that's where the building of communities starting from within the home is important, and that's where you could go with something like that and find space held for you to have that thought process and that experiment in your head, and given the time and the chance to work it out. For many of us, we are always living in this constant state of emergency. We are in a constant state of what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next. And people think it's been 2 months or since George Floyd or since... There's so many names, may they rest. It's been going on for 400 years. 1619 was the first time a Dutch, I don't know what you would call them, but yeah, settlers found their way to the Cape of Africa. And since then, we have been in a state of apocalypse, a state of emergency. And we have had generation and generation of Black person born into this state. And so it is not surprising that now we are having a bunch of Black people who are just beyond tired, and when they're tired, they're soul deep tired, like they're bone tired. It's a kind of tired you wouldn't expect for somebody as young, because you would expect, do you still have the rest of your life ahead of you? But what are we carrying with us? We are carrying with us the pain and all of the baggage from former versions of ourselves, but also our ancestors. We are carrying it with us. So if you take time and you expand it, you can also collapse it in itself. And so in this time, you're your ancestor, yourself, and your descendant at the same time, and you're carrying all of that with you. And so you need a space where that can be worked out slowly, where you can be given the chance to understand that, verbalize that, contextualize that, and then arm yourself. Because we must arm ourselves with the theories and the practices that we need to take the revolution to the next step. And very much reading is part of that. As Black people, we don't learn shit from university other than how to properly conceptualize what we are saying. What it is a codified experience. All our experiences have been codified for us. So when you go to the classroom, nothing is really that surprising, and no theory takes you more than 2 days to grasp, because you've lived it. You've lived it either now you've lived it, or in a past life you've lived it, or in a future life you've lived it. And so this idea that we can only find answers in the ivory towers of schools and institutions is something we must move past as a community and start building communities where we and really like that interweave themselves with one another, like the roots of a tree. So if my home is one community, then the roots would move out to the next and to the next and to the next, in a way that we have then connected all of us on this globe together, one another, and we share from that shared consciousness, because there is a shared global consciousness that we all tap into. And if 2020 is the year of anything, it's the year of understanding the idea that we need to clear some space. Physically, we need to clear some space, but spiritually, we also need to clear a lot of space. And a lot of space needs to be cleared from that consciousness as well, because there's a lot of things hanging loose. And what is happening is that we are being affected by that. And we physically feel it, and we can name it, but in the same way, in the same sense, we can't. In the same sense, we don't even really understand it. And that's where the confusion Heleen is talking about is coming from. And that's where Faiza's confusion is coming from. It's this idea for, like, I've been doing this. I feel like I've been doing this for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, but I've been on this planet for 25 years. What's up? There is a physical world that is very much interconnected. There is also a spiritual world within that physical world that's also interconnected. And once we understand that interconnectedness, that we are connected, we do not stand in dominion over things, over everything in the planet. We are part of it. So we are connected to those living sentient beings on the planet, and we are connected to one another spiritually. And that also needs a healing. And we cannot do that healing alone. And I think Black people have been trying to do that healing forever by themselves. But it's global. So we must be joined in this healing, you know? In order for us all to heal, you all need to start contacting your ancestors and talking to them, please, sir. and you know, like, what were you doing? Questions must be asked. You must pay. There isn't a way where we can move on. You know, even in religious practice, there's this idea of sacrifice. There must be a payment. You cannot move without that payment, and so that payment has to be made. And in order for there to be a clearing and an idea of a new way, to make space for that imagination that we keep on talking about to flourish in a way where we can create a world where there is equity and equality for everybody, and where we can live peacefully and move and progress this real experiment of the human condition. You know?
Yeah. And what you're saying really makes me think, especially this idea of living in the past, in the present, in the future, living as an ancestor, the carrying of at the moment, there's this like burgeoning field of study, epigenetics, looking at intergenerational trauma, the way that information is carried on a molecular level from generation to generation to generation. And there's a very interesting writer, if anyone's interested in this kind of theory, a psychoanalyst from America, Resmaa Menakem, and he writes about how as a psychoanalyst, how he studied the process of memory, trauma, and specifically racialized trauma remaining in the body, and exercises for Black people, white people, or rather people of culture, as he calls them. Physical exercises, so great,
That's
right?
amazing.
People of culture. Girl, it's done. But like he has exercises that he works with, working with the psoas, working with different sympathetic nervous systems in the body for Black people and white people to process and heal from racialized trauma. But what you were saying about the past, the present, and the future, it makes me think of the saying, and I forget who it comes from, we need to be good ancestors.
We do.
That's how we need to live out in the present, and that we are, they say this a lot in kind of like climate justice circles, that we are loaning the planet from the generation underneath us, or the younger generation, and we need to think of it in that way, that we are in stewardship of the land, of the earth as a physical space, but also the kind of energetic realm that you're talking about. We are in guardians and stewards of that, and someone is going to inherit that. And thinking about it as like we're borrowing it from them. It is not, because whatever it is we leave them will be theirs. So I really, really appreciate that. And I'm also acknowledging that we are at time. So I want to bring us to a close with a quote by Adrienne Maree Brown in her text, Emergent Strategy, which is kind of the jumping off point for this conversation. And she says that we must remember that we are water. Of course you leave salt trails. Of course you are crying. Flow. P.S. If there happens to be a multitude of griefs upon you, individual and collective, or fast and slow, or small and large, add equal parts of these considerations. That the broken heart can cover more territory. That perhaps love can only be as large as grief demands. That grief is the growing up of the heart that bursts boundaries like an old skin or a finished life. That grief is gratitude. That water seeks scale, that even your tears seek the recognition of community, that the heart is a front line, and the fight is to feel in a world of distraction, that death might be the only freedom, that your grief is a worthwhile use of your time, that your body will feel only as much as it is able to, that the ones you grieve may be grieving you, that the sacred comes from the limitations, that you are excellent at loving. And on that note, I want to thank everyone who has joined us tonight for this conversation around Black emergency. Thank you for your generosity and giving your time. Thank you to our amazing, amazing, amazing speakers, Heleen Debeuckelaere and Philsan Osman. Thank you so much for joining us and being so generous with your wisdom and your experiences. Thank you for your brilliant question that you asked. I'm hoping that everyone has a beautiful and safe summer further. And until the next In the Soup, which will be in October, I hope you and wish you all very, very well. Much love.